The room was electric with tension. Rows of government officials, military leaders, and scientists sat around the Grand United Nations Assembly Hall, their faces grim. On the large central screen, a video feed showed the vast alien fleet that had arrived in Earth's orbit just 3 hours earlier. The ships, sleek, silver, and eerily silent, hovered as though waiting for something, or someone. In the front row, Captain Dean Mitchell adjusted the microphone in front of him and leaned back slightly. The former fighter pilot turned military liaison had been pulled from retirement after the aliens made contact. With his wiry build, silver-streaked dark hair, and a voice that carried weight without shouting, Dean had always been known for his calm under pressure. To his left sat Dr. Olivia Kwan, head of the United Nations Science Division, and to his right, Commander Richard Ellis from the European Defense Initiative. Together, they represented Earth's first line of communication with the extraterrestrial visitors. None of them had expected this day to come so suddenly. The Secretary General's voice filled the room. Ladies and gentlemen, we've received the transmission. I'll play it now. A sharp tone echoed from the speakers. On the screen, a humanoid figure appeared. Its skin had a metallic sheen, and its eyes glowed faintly. Behind it stood what looked like a council chamber, filled with other alien representatives of varying shapes and sizes. I am Envoy Celar of the Galactic Council, the alien announced, its voice echoing with a metallic resonance. Humans of Earth, your world has been monitored for centuries. You have reached a level of technological development that cannot go unchecked. The Galactic Council requires that you surrender all nuclear weapons, integrate into the interstellar community, and submit to Council oversight immediately. You will have 30 planetary cycles to comply. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the room in stunned silence. Dean broke the silence first. Submit? Just like that. He leaned forward, his voice steady. We don't know anything about them. Why now? What are they afraid of? Dr. Kwan tapped the microphone on her desk. We can't assume they're afraid. This might be how they approach all new civilizations. It's possible they've seen planets destroy themselves after reaching a certain level of technology, and they think this is the only way to keep us from doing the same. Commander Ellis scowled. They didn't come to ask nicely. They came with an ultimatum. That's not an invitation to the club. That's a threat. I agree, Dean said. If they wanted to help, they'd offer assistance, guidance. Instead, they parked a fleet in our skies and gave us a deadline. The Secretary General rubbed his temples and finally spoke. Captain Mitchell, Dr. Kwan, Commander Ellis, you three have the most direct experience dealing with crises of this nature. I need a preliminary plan of action. If we comply, we lose our sovereignty. If we resist, we risk conflict. There's no easy choice here. Dean's mind raced. He exchanged a glance with Olivia, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We can't make a decision until we understand who we're dealing with, Dean said. We need to learn more about the Galactic Council. What other civilizations are part of it? What happened to those who refused to join? And how do we even begin to communicate with them? Olivia added. The message was clear, but we need a dialogue, not just a one-sided demand. Then that's your task, the Secretary General said. Captain Mitchell, Dr. Kwan, Commander Ellis, you're our first contact team. Establish communication. Find out what we're up against. I'll give you full authority to coordinate with every major space agency, intelligence agency, and academic institution. But remember, we have 30 days. Time is not on our side. After the meeting, the three of them huddled in a small conference room off to the side. Dean leaned on the table, his hands spread wide. If we're going to communicate, we need to figure out their language patterns, their cultural cues. Olivia, that's where you come in. You've studied alien linguistic structures. Any chance you can start piecing together something from that transmission? It's not much to go on, Olivia admitted. But I can run it through every comparative algorithm we've got. I'll need help from the linguistics teams at MIT and CERN. Good, Dean said. And Richard, what's the military's position? We're on high alert, Ellis said. But we're under orders not to provoke. No one wants a firefight in orbit, right? Keep it that way. But stay prepared, just in case. Dean took a deep breath. We need to stay calm and gather information. We'll send a response, cautious, neutral, and focused on dialogue. We've got 30 days to figure out what they want and why. Let's not waste a single one. As the three of them left the room, Dean felt the weight of the task ahead. They had to buy time, find allies, and somehow convince a superior galactic power that Earth deserved a seat at the table. Not as a subject, but as an equal. And they had only 30 days to do it. Chapter 2. The Ultimatum. The sun was just beginning to rise over New York City, casting long shadows through the tall glass windows of the United Nations headquarters. Captain Dean Mitchell stood on the terrace outside the General Assembly Hall, staring out at the city below. His hands were clasped behind his back, his posture stiff, as if he could physically hold the weight of the previous day's events on his shoulders. Footsteps echoed behind him, and Dean turned to see Commander Richard Ellis approaching. Ellis's crisp uniform and military precision were a stark contrast to the dark circles under his eyes. He looked as though he hadn't slept, which wasn't surprising. None of them had. "Mitchell," Ellis greeted, his tone flat. "Any word from the council?" Dean shook his head. "Not yet. They gave us their message and then fell silent. I'm guessing they're waiting for us to scramble around before they make another move." Ellis leaned against the railing, looking out over the city with a tight-lipped expression. "We've scrambled, all right. Every agency on the planet is working overtime. Defense departments are on edge, space agencies are running simulations, and half the world's leaders are calling us for answers we don't have." Dean nodded. "And all we know is that we've got 29 days left to figure this out." Another set of footsteps approached, and Dr. Olivia Kwan joined them on the terrace. She carried a tablet, her fingers flying across the screen as she scanned through data. "I've been running analysis on their transmission," she said without preamble. "Still no luck identifying a shared linguistic framework. They're using some sort of universal translator, but the encoding doesn't match any known pattern." "Then how did we understand them so clearly?" Ellis asked, frowning. Olivia looked up from her tablet. "That's what's strange. The message was tailored to us. It wasn't just their words. There were visual elements, cultural references, even concepts that seemed designed to resonate. It's as if they've been studying us for a long time." Dean tilted his head, his expression hardening. "That's not exactly comforting. If they've been studying us, they should know we're not going to roll over and submit." "That may be exactly why they're pushing so hard," Olivia said. "They know we're stubborn, so they're trying to assert dominance quickly, before we can organize any kind of meaningful resistance." Ellis scoffed. "Dominance is putting it lightly. They're trying to pull a fast one. This whole protectorate talk is just a nicer word for conquest." Before Dean could respond, the Secretary General stepped onto the terrace, his presence immediately commanding attention. He was a tall man with a deep voice, and though his suit was impeccable, his lined face betrayed the stress of the situation. "Captain Mitchell, Commander Ellis, Dr. Kwan," he said, his voice firm. "The Security Council is convening in 20 minutes. They're expecting a preliminary strategy." Dean raised an eyebrow. "A strategy? We haven't even established proper contact." "Nevertheless, we need to present something. The world is watching. We need to project unity and competence, even if we're still working through the details." Ellis glanced at Dean, then back to the Secretary General. "What exactly are we supposed to tell them? That we'll smile and nod while these aliens strip us of our autonomy?" The Secretary General's expression darkened. "I trust you three to find the balance. We cannot appear weak, but we cannot escalate the situation, either. Captain Mitchell, I'm putting you in charge of drafting our official response. Dr. Kwan, assist him with the linguistic nuances and any cultural context. Commander Ellis, coordinate with the military branches to ensure our defensive posture is solid without being provocative." Dean straightened. "Understood, sir. We'll be ready." After the Secretary General left, the three of them huddled together, speaking in low tones. "Ellis, What's our current readiness status? Dean asked. Ellis rubbed his temples. We're at DEFCON 2. All global missile defense systems are on alert, and every major space agency is tracking their fleet's position. So far, no movement from them, but we can't assume they'll stay put. Olivia looked between the two men. If they wanted to attack, why haven't they done so already? They clearly have the upper hand. Why wait? Dean's jaw tightened. They're waiting for us to make the first move. Any sign of aggression on our part gives them the justification to use force. We have to play this carefully. Then how do we respond? Ellis asked. They gave us a deadline and nothing else. What can we say that doesn't make us look weak? We acknowledge their message, Dean said. We tell them we're reviewing their terms, but we need clarification. Use their own strategy against them, buy time, gather intel, and see if we can find a weakness or a diplomatic opening. Olivia nodded. That could work. If we keep the tone neutral and professional, we can stall while we analyze their motives. In the meantime, I'll keep working on breaking down their transmission. If I can find any hidden data or secondary signals, we might get a better understanding of who we're dealing with. Dean placed a hand on her shoulder briefly. Good. Keep at it. Ellis, make sure our forces don't overreact to any small changes up there. We need everyone calm and steady. Ellis smirked, though it didn't reach his eyes. I'll try, but calm isn't exactly our strong suit right now. As the three headed back inside, Dean felt the gravity of their task settle over him. The clock was ticking, and the fate of Earth depended on their ability to navigate a situation they'd never faced before. All they could do now was stay focused, work together, and hope that their response would buy them the time they desperately needed. Chapter 3. Unexpected Alliance. The alien craft hovered like a polished silver mountain against the vast darkness of space. Captain Dean Mitchell stood at the viewing port aboard Earth's hastily repurposed orbital station, the Artemis IV. Behind him, Commander Richard Ellis was pacing the room. You sure about this, Dean? Ellis said, his hands clasped behind his back. This could be a trap. Dean turned to face his old friend, his jaw set. I don't know if I'm sure about anything right now, but sitting around and waiting for them to dictate the terms isn't getting us anywhere. Before Ellis could respond, the station's comm system crackled to life. Captain Mitchell, the alien envoy has arrived and is requesting to come aboard. Dean nodded at the technician and then turned back to Ellis. Let's see what they have to say. A few minutes later, Dean and Ellis were standing in the station's docking bay as the airlock cycled open. A faint hiss followed, and then a figure stepped through. A humanoid alien with metallic gray skin, deep-set luminous eyes, and long, thin limbs. The alien's attire was simple but elegant, a flowing tunic-like garment that shimmered in the station's artificial light. I am Theron Vire, the alien said, her voice calm and even. I come as a representative of the Galactic Council's Envoy Corps. Dean stepped forward, his hand extended. Captain Dean Mitchell, this is Commander Richard Ellis. Thera hesitated, her glowing eyes flicking to Dean's hand. Then she extended her own, and the two shook hands. Her grip was surprisingly firm, her skin smooth but slightly cool to the touch. Welcome aboard the Artemis IV, Dean said. We appreciate you coming here to speak with us directly. I hope we can establish a constructive dialogue, Thera replied. She glanced at Ellis, who gave her a curt nod. The Council is concerned about the consequences of Earth's technological development. I've come to help ensure a peaceful integration. Peaceful integration, Ellis muttered under his breath. Dean shot him a warning look, and Ellis fell silent. Thera continued. Our records show that your species has achieved rapid advancement in a short span of time. This often leads to instability. The Council's goal is to provide guidance and prevent the kind of conflicts that have plagued other emerging civilizations. Dean folded his arms. Guidance or control? Because what we've seen so far feels more like an ultimatum than a helping hand. Thera tilted her head, as if considering his words carefully. Perhaps our approach was miscalculated. The Council is accustomed to dealing with species that require strong leadership. We did not intend to present ourselves as aggressors. Ellis snorted. Could have fooled us. Dean held up a hand to keep Ellis in check. Look, Thera, we understand the importance of stability, but humanity values its independence. We can't just hand over control of our planet because an alien council says it's for our own good. I'm not asking for blind compliance, Thera said, her voice calm. I'm asking for cooperation. If we can work together, I believe we can find a path that satisfies both Earth and the Council. Dean and Ellis exchanged a glance. Dean's expression softened slightly. All right, let's see if we can start by sharing some information. You tell us more about the Council's history, its goals, and how it operates. In return, we'll provide insight into Earth's current state. Maybe there's a way forward that doesn't involve ultimatums. Thera nodded. Agreed. I will share what I can. Dean gestured for her to follow him. Let's move to the conference room. We can talk more comfortably there. As they walked through the station's corridors, Thera seemed to take in every detail. The crew moving about, the way the metal walls reflected light, the low hum of the station's life support systems. It's remarkable, she said quietly. Your species has accomplished so much in such a short time. Ellis, walking a few steps behind, raised an eyebrow. Yeah, well, we've had our share of missteps along the way. Dean glanced over his shoulder. We're still figuring things out, Thera. Maybe that's why we're so wary of outside interference. I understand, Thera said, her voice almost gentle. Change is difficult, but sometimes it's necessary. They reached the conference room and took their seats around the table. Dean leaned forward, resting his arms on the surface. All right, Thera, start from the beginning. Who exactly is this Galactic Council, and what do they really want from Earth? Thera folded her hands on the table, her luminous eyes fixed on Dean. The Galactic Council is an alliance of advanced civilizations that have agreed to uphold certain principles: peace, mutual development, and the prevention of catastrophic conflicts. When a world reaches a certain technological threshold, the Council intervenes to guide its integration into the larger community. Intervenes how? Dean pressed. Thera hesitated. It depends. In some cases, we offer knowledge and resources. In others, we establish a protectorate status until the species is deemed ready to govern itself responsibly. Ellis leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed. And what if a species says no? Thera's expression didn't change, but there was a hint of tension in her voice. We try to avoid conflict. If a species refuses outright, we isolate them. They cannot trade or interact with Council-aligned civilizations. Over time, most find it in their best interest to reconsider. Dean tapped his fingers on the table. So it's not war, but it's still a form of pressure. It is a means of preserving peace and stability, Thera said. Dean met her gaze. And what about Earth? What do you think would happen if we chose not to comply? Thera's glowing eyes flicked between Dean and Ellis. I don't know. That's why I'm here. To find another path. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Dean nodded slowly. All right, let's see if we can find that path together. Chapter 4, Learning Together. The meeting room aboard the Artemis IV had been repurposed into a makeshift cultural exchange hub. Dean stood near the central display table, watching a holographic projection of the galaxy's known inhabited worlds, provided by Thera. Next to him, Ellis leaned over the table, his fingers tracing the outlines of certain planets as though by touching them he might glean some insight. I still can't wrap my head around it, Ellis said. How does a civilization grow so advanced it can form a council like this without tearing itself apart first? Thera, seated across the table, folded her hands and tilted her head. It wasn't easy. Many of the council's member species went through long periods of unrest. The difference is that, at critical points, each found ways to prioritize cooperation over conflict. Over millennia, this led to a framework that could guide others down similar paths. Dean leaned back against the wall. Sounds ideal, but it doesn't account for the fact that humans tend to disagree on just about everything. Thera's glowing eyes shifted to him. And yet you have also achieved incredible feats through collaboration. You've built wonders, cured diseases, ventured into space. The council sees that potential in you. Ellis let out a low chuckle. Potential's great, but what about the parts where we almost blew ourselves to bits? That is precisely why the council seeks to guide you now, Thera said evenly. They believe this is a pivotal moment. How Earth navigates the next steps will determine whether it becomes a valued member of the interstellar community or something less desirable. Dean crossed his arms. So what's your part in all this, Thera? You seem more reasonable than most of your council. What do you think Earth should do? Thera hesitated, as if carefully choosing her words. I believe Earth should retain its independence. But I also believe it must demonstrate that it can engage responsibly with the wider galaxy. That's why I'm here, not to issue orders, but to help you find the balance. Ellis gave Dean a sidelong glance. And how exactly are we supposed to demonstrate responsibility? Is there some kind of intergalactic aptitude test we need to pass? Dean smirked. Yeah, maybe a quiz on not blowing up our neighbors. Thera's lips curved in what could almost be a smile. It's not a formal test, but your decisions in the coming weeks will be observed. The Council needs to see that Earth can act, not OU. A chance to shape the narrative. To show that humanity can be more than what the Council expects. Dean tapped the table, thinking, we need to start with mutual understanding. If the Council sees Earth as a wild card, we need to change that perception. Let's begin by showing them who we really are. And how exactly do we do that? Ellis asked. We invite them in, Dean said. Controlled visits. Show them Earth's strengths. Not just our technology, but our culture, our art, our achievements. Let them see us beyond the headlines and the conflicts. Thera raised a hand, her metallic skin catching the light. That approach could be effective. I can help facilitate visits, starting with small delegations. Ellis frowned. Isn't that a bit risky? Bringing aliens down to the surface, letting them see everything. They've already been observing us from orbit, Dean countered. Let's make it official. If they see our humanity, our ingenuity, creativity, even our humor, it might help shift their perspective. Thera nodded slowly. I'll work with the Council to arrange it, but it must be carefully managed. Some on the Council will resist, arguing that direct contact could lead to unforeseen consequences. Dean straightened, and we'll be prepared to handle those arguments. If we're going to earn a seat at the table, we have to start by being transparent. Showing them the best of who we are. Just as long as it doesn't end with a bunch of aliens deciding to protect us even harder. Ellis muttered, still skeptical. Dean clapped him on the shoulder. Ellis, we're doing this so we don't have to play by their rules. We'll show them we're worth more as allies than subjects. Sure, Ellis said with a faint grin. I'll try to remember that when they're touring the Statue of Liberty and asking how we managed to mess up so many things before finally getting it right. Dean laughed. If they ask that, we'll just tell them it's part of the human charm. Thera's luminous eyes gleamed. If nothing else, I think they'll find you unique. The three of them continued planning, their voices blending into a quiet hum of discussion. It was just a first step, but for Dean it felt like progress. Chapter 5, Growing Closer. Dean stood on a sandy dune overlooking a vast expanse of turquoise water. The Galactic Council delegation had chosen this remote desert coastline for their first official visit to Earth's surface, and the setting was nothing short of stunning. Alien ships floated silently above the ocean, their sleek forms reflecting the afternoon sun. A gentle wind carried the salty tang of the sea, and the sound of waves rolling against the shore provided a soothing backdrop. Behind Dean, Ellis adjusted his collar and muttered, I still can't believe they're here, walking on our beaches, eating our food, drinking our coffee. Dean glanced back, smirking. You mean the stuff they insisted on calling bean-based infusions? Yeah, that was a fun explanation. Ellis chuckled. It's not the coffee I'm worried about. It's what happens when they start asking questions we can't answer. That's why we're here, Dean said. To show them we're more than just a planet on the verge of self-destruction. We're more than the wars and the bad headlines. We're people. Flawed. Sure, but worth knowing. Ellis gave a reluctant nod. Still feels like we're walking a tightrope. Then let's make sure we don't fall. Ahead of them, Thera stood at the water's edge, her silvery skin catching the sunlight like polished metal. She seemed utterly absorbed in the scene before her, the way the waves danced as they met the shore. Dean approached slowly, his boots sinking slightly into the soft sand. "Thera," he said quietly, not wanting to startle her. She turned her head, her glowing eyes meeting his. "Captain Mitchell, I was just admiring this ocean. So alive. Always moving, always changing." "Yeah, that's the ocean for you. Beautiful, unpredictable, and sometimes dangerous," Dean said, stepping up beside her. Thera tilted her head slightly, considering his words. "Much like your species." Dean gave a small laugh. "Fair enough. We're definitely not boring." Ellis joined them, standing on Thera's other side. "It's not all beaches and sunsets, though. Earth has plenty of messes we're still trying to clean up." Thera looked from Ellis to Dean. "You speak openly about your world's flaws. It's refreshing." Dean shrugged. "No point in hiding it. If we want the council to understand us, we have to show them everything, the good and the bad." Thera's lips curved into a faint smile. "That is a rare perspective. Many civilizations seek to conceal their imperfections. But your honesty is compelling." Dean's expression softened. "Honesty's all we've got. If we can't be honest, then what's the point of any of this?" Ellis cleared his throat. "Right. Well, while you two get philosophical, I'm gonna check on the delegation. Make sure they're not trying to dismantle the local wildlife to study it." "Thanks, Ellis," Dean said, watching him head back up the beach toward a small cluster of alien and human representatives. When he was gone, Dean turned his attention back to Thera. "What do you really think of all this?" Thera's glowing eyes seemed to take on a softer hue as she gazed at the ocean. "Your world is more complex than I expected. I've read your histories, studied your cultures, but being here, it's different. There is something uniquely human that cannot be captured in data or reports." Dean raised an eyebrow. "Careful. You're starting to sound like a fan." She gave a quiet laugh, a sound that seemed almost musical. "Perhaps I am. I've spent much of my life serving the council, following protocols, adhering to their vision of order. But here I feel, I'm not sure how to describe it. Connected, perhaps." Dean shifted slightly, his boots crunching the sand beneath him. "I think I get it. For all our faults, we've got a way of pulling people or aliens in. We're messy, yeah, but we're also, well, we care. About each other, about our planet, about the future." Thera turned to him, her luminous gaze meeting his once more. "You care, Captain Mitchell. I see that. And it's a quality that gives me hope." Dean glanced out at the horizon, the sun dipping lower, painting the water in shades of gold and orange. "It's not just me. There are billions of us down here who just want a chance to prove we're worth standing with, not standing over." Thera stepped closer, her metallic skin catching the last rays of sunlight. "You're different from the other council envoys I've worked with. They see the humans as a problem to be managed. I see them as a people to be understood." Dean looked at her, their proximity now closer than it had ever been. "I'm glad you see us that way. It means a lot." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of waves and distant laughter from the delegation filled the space between them. Then, in a gesture that felt both natural and strange, Thera reached out and lightly touched Dean's hand. Her fingers were cool and smooth, and he felt a faint pulse of energy pass between them. "Thank you, Dean," she said softly. He looked down at her hand, then back up at her glowing eyes. "For what?" "For showing me that even in the midst of uncertainty, there are things worth holding on to." Dean smiled, a small but genuine smile. "Guess that's just part of who we are." As the sun sank below the horizon, the two stood together in silence, their hands briefly touching, as the waves rolled on. Chapter 6. Turning the Tide. Dean sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by Ellis and Thera. The room was alive with murmured conversations as members of the council delegation and Earth's representatives filed in. Holographic charts hovered above the table, showing star maps, trade routes, and lines of communication. The atmosphere was tense, but there was a flicker of cautious optimism in the air. "All right, everyone, let's get started," Dean said, raising a hand for silence. The room fell quiet, all eyes on him. "We've spent the last 2 weeks exchanging information, visiting each other's worlds, and discussing our respective priorities. Today, we're going to present our proposal, a formal partnership between Earth and the Galactic Council." Ellis leaned forward, scanning the room. "Before we get into specifics, let me be clear. Earth's sovereignty is non-negotiable. We won't become a protectorate, and we won't give up control over our own future. But we're open to collaboration, trade, technology sharing, joint research initiatives. That's how we'll both benefit." One of the council envoys, a tall figure with translucent skin and spindly limbs, raised a hand. "Captain Mitchell, Commander Ellis, we appreciate your efforts to address our concerns. However, many within the Council still question Earth's readiness to participate in interstellar affairs. Your history of conflict and resource mismanagement cannot be ignored." Dean nodded, meeting the envoy's gaze. "I understand why you'd feel that way. Our past is far from perfect, but we've also shown an incredible capacity to adapt and improve. Look at what we've achieved in the last century alone, breakthroughs in medicine, energy, and space exploration. We're not just surviving. We're building a future." Thera spoke next, her voice calm and measured. "I've witnessed Earth's progress firsthand. I've seen your people's creativity, their passion for discovery, and their determination to find solutions. It would be a mistake to judge them solely by their past. The humans I've come to know are more than capable of contributing to the Council's mission." Ellis leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "And let's not pretend the Council's history is spotless. Every one of your member civilizations had their own struggles before joining. Why should Earth be held to a higher standard?" The translucent envoy's glowing eyes shifted colors, a sign of consideration. "Your point is noted, Commander. However, we must ensure that Earth's integration does not destabilize the Council's existing structure." Dean spread his hands. "We're not asking to change the Council's structure. We're asking for a seat at the table, so we can share ideas, learn from each other, and work toward common goals. By bringing Earth in as a full member, the Council gains a motivated, innovative partner. Together, we can tackle challenges more effectively." A murmur rippled through the Council envoys. Thera exchanged a brief glance with Dean, her subtle nod encouraging him to continue. "We've prepared a detailed proposal," Dean said, gesturing to the holographic display. "It includes phased integration measures, safeguards to prevent resource strain, and joint research projects in fields like renewable energy, advanced manufacturing, and space exploration. These aren't just promises. They're concrete steps we're ready to take." Another envoy, shorter and with a shell-like exterior, raised their voice. "What assurances can you provide that Earth will not become a liability?" Ellis straightened. "We've got contingency plans. We've established international agreements to maintain stability, and we're committing to transparency. You'll know what we're doing when we're doing it and why. If you see any issues, we'll address them. We're not hiding anything." Dean leaned in, his expression firm. "Look, we know we have a lot to prove, but the best way to prove it is by working together. Give us a chance to show you what we can do as partners, not subordinates. If we succeed, the Council gains a valuable ally. If we falter, then we'll have to face the consequences. But at least give us the opportunity." Thera stood, her presence commanding attention. "Earth is at a crossroads. By welcoming them into the Council, you have the power to guide their path. But exclusion will only breed resentment and isolation. I believe humanity's potential far outweighs the risks." The room was silent as the Council envoys considered the arguments. Dean glanced at Ellis, who gave a slight nod, and then at Thera, whose glowing eyes met his with quiet confidence. They had done all they could to present Earth's case. Now it was up to the Council. The translucent envoy finally spoke. "Captain Mitchell, Commander Ellis, Envoy Theran Vire, Your proposal is compelling. While not all of our members may agree, I believe it warrants serious consideration. We will take your recommendations back to the council for deliberation. Dean stood, extending a hand. Thank you. That's all we ask. The envoy shook his hand, an unexpected gesture that drew a small, surprised reaction from the Earth representatives. As the council envoys left the room, Dean turned to Ellis and Thera. That went better than I expected, Ellis admitted. It's not over yet, Dean said, his voice cautious but hopeful. But I think we just took a big step forward. Thera placed a hand lightly on Dean's shoulder. You presented your case well. The council will listen. Dean gave her a small smile. We'll see. But I couldn't have done it without both of you. Ellis smirked. Don't get all sentimental, Mitchell. We've still got work to do. Sure, Ellis, Dean said, shaking his head. Sure. Chapter 7, The Decision. The central chamber of the Galactic Council headquarters hummed with quiet anticipation. Delegates from dozens of alien civilizations filled the curved rows of seats, their features as varied as the stars they hailed from. At the very front of the room, Captain Dean Mitchell, Commander Richard Ellis, and Theron Vire stood behind a podium, their holographic presentation shimmering before them. Dean glanced at Thera, who gave him a reassuring nod. He took a deep breath and began, his voice steady and confident. Members of the Galactic Council, thank you for convening on such short notice. Today, we're here to address a decision that will define our future. The proposal before you is more than just a request for membership. It's an invitation to partnership. Ellis took a step forward, scanning the assembly. We understand that Earth's history gives you reason to hesitate, but we're not here to make excuses. We're here to show you what's possible when we work together. One of the counselors, a towering figure with crystalline skin, raised a hand. Captain Mitchell, the council recognizes Earth's potential, but many remain concerned about the risks of including a world that has only recently achieved interstellar travel. How can we be certain that your people will not bring instability? Dean nodded. It's a fair question. The answer is we can't make guarantees, no more than any of you could have when your own worlds join the council. What we can promise is a commitment to transparency and cooperation. We've seen how isolation breeds fear and misunderstanding. By becoming part of the council, we can prevent that and build something better together. Ellis leaned on the podium. You've seen our proposal. Phased integration, regular oversight, and joint initiatives in technology and research. We're not asking to change your rules. We're offering to follow them, while bringing our unique strengths to the table. Another counselor, a shorter, insectoid being with delicate wings, spoke up. Your proposal is compelling, but it's still just words. Words are not enough. Dean turned to Thera, who stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. I've lived among the humans. I've seen their creativity, their drive, and their willingness to learn. I've also seen their flaws. What makes them exceptional is that they acknowledge those flaws and strive to improve. They don't claim to be perfect, but they don't give up. I believe they can become valuable contributors to the council. The chamber buzzed with low murmurs. Dean exchanged a glance with Ellis, who raised an eyebrow, silently urging him to push forward. I won't stand here and tell you that Earth is without challenges, Dean said, his voice rising slightly. But think of what we've already achieved. In the short time we've had access to the stars, we've adapted, innovated, and started building meaningful relationships. You have the power to help us continue on that path, not through control, but through collaboration. A counselor with a flowing, translucent form floated closer to the podium. Captain Mitchell, if we vote to include Earth, it will require careful monitoring and support. Your world would need to demonstrate its willingness to adhere to council standards. Are you prepared for that? Dean nodded firmly. We are. We're ready to work with you, to learn from you, and to contribute in every way we can. Ellis smirked slightly. We may not have thousands of years of experience in galactic diplomacy, but we know how to get things done. Give us a chance and we'll prove ourselves. Thera turned to the assembly, her voice steady. This is a moment to embrace the future. Earth is not a perfect world, but it's a world with incredible potential. By bringing them into the council, you strengthen the entire community. The chamber fell silent as the counselors considered the arguments. The lead counselor, a being with a shimmering metallic visage, finally spoke. The council will now deliberate. Please step back while we vote. Dean, Ellis, and Thera retreated to a side room, waiting as the counselors cast their votes. The silence in the room was heavy, the three of them standing close together. You think they'll go for it? Ellis asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. Dean shrugged. It's hard to say. We've done everything we could. Now it's up to them. Thera looked at them both, her glowing eyes reflecting calm determination. Whatever their decision, you should know that your efforts have made a difference. You've shown them a side of humanity they hadn't seen before. Dean gave her a small smile. Thanks, Thera. That means a lot. The door opened, and a council aide entered. The deliberation is complete. Please return to the chamber. They followed the aide back into the central hall. The lead counselor stood at the podium, the assembly watching silently. Captain Mitchell, Commander Ellis, Envoy Theranvire. The lead counselor began. The council has reviewed your proposal. After extensive deliberation, we have reached a decision. Dean held his breath, his hands clasped tightly behind his back. The counselor's voice carried across the chamber. Earth will be granted membership in the Galactic Council. Your proposal is accepted, and the integration process will begin immediately. A wave of murmurs swept through the room, some approving, others skeptical. Dean felt a weight lift from his shoulders, and he glanced at Ellis, who exhaled sharply, his usual smirk returning. Well, I'll be damned, Ellis muttered. They actually went for it. Thera turned to Dean, her expression softer than usual. You've done it. Earth is now part of something greater. Dean extended his hand to her. No, Thera. We did it. Together. She took his hand, her cool fingers firm in his grasp. For a moment, the two of them stood there, surrounded by the hum of the chamber, united by the realization that the impossible had just become possible. Chapter 8. A New Dawn. The early light of dawn filtered through the vast glass panels of the Galactic Council's assembly chamber, casting soft hues of blue and gold. Dean Mitchell stood on a balcony overlooking the sprawling city below, his hands resting on the railing. From this height, he could see ships rising and descending. Ellis walked out onto the balcony, a steaming cup of something that resembled coffee in hand. He looked at Dean, then out at the view. Not a bad way to start the day, he said. Though I still miss the smell of a real brew. Dean smirked. Careful, Ellis. You keep that up, and they might start importing our coffee just to shut you up. That'd be a win for humanity, Ellis replied, taking a sip and wincing. Still tastes like engine coolant. Dean chuckled. So, how does it feel knowing you helped make history? Ellis shrugged. Same as it feels waking up any other day, just with more aliens around. He leaned on the railing beside Dean. What about you? You've been staring out here for a while. Dean's smile faded slightly as he looked back at the city. It's surreal. We fought so hard to prove ourselves, to convince them we belonged. And now that we're in, I keep wondering what happens next. Next? Ellis raised an eyebrow. Next, we get to work. We start building. It's what we do best. Dean turned to face him. And you think we're ready for that? Ellis shrugged again. We don't have much of a choice. Ready or not, we're here. And let's be honest, half the time we're at our best when our backs are against the wall. So yeah, I think we'll figure it out. The sound of soft footsteps drew their attention. Thera approached, her metallic skin catching the morning light, her glowing eyes calm and steady. She stopped a few feet away, her hands folded in front of her. Good morning, she said. Morning, Dean replied. Enjoying the sunrise? It's beautiful, she said. The council's world is impressive, but there's something about Earth's sunrise. Its colors, its warmth, that I find comforting. Ellis snorted. You should see it from a mountaintop back home. Nothing beats that. Thera smiled faintly. I'll take your word for it, Commander. For now. Dean stepped closer to her. So, what's the plan for today? More integration talks. Thera nodded. Yes, the Council wants to begin formalizing Earth's participation in trade agreements and research initiatives. It's a long process, but the early steps are critical. Sounds like paperwork, Ellis muttered. Thera's smile widened slightly. It's not as glamorous as first contact, but it's no less important. Dean tilted his head. You're staying, then? I thought you'd be reassigned once this was settled. Thera met his gaze, her voice softening. I requested to remain part of the process. I believe my experience with Earth will be valuable as we move forward. And... She hesitated, looking between Dean and Ellis. I feel that my work here is far from finished. Ellis gave a knowing smirk. Guess you're stuck with us a little longer, huh? It would seem so, Thera replied, her tone light but sincere. Dean felt a small but genuine smile forming. Good. We've come this far together. Let's see it through. Thera inclined her head. Agreed. Ellis drained the last of his drink and set the cup on the railing. All right, enough standing around. Let's get to it. The three of them walked back inside, their steps steady and their purpose clear. The road ahead was still long, still uncertain, but they weren't walking it alone. Together, they had begun to reshape Earth's place in the galaxy.